Welcome to the last Legacy Studio, and thanks for joining us, myself and our executive producer, Brian Lasser, for this very interesting episode of My Day, My Story podcast. I am your host, MC par excellence, Odim Demokuri Akbero Jamaye Oma Babagbobani himself. If this is your first time on this channel, thanks for checking us out. And if you are a returning subscriber, welcome back. And please share, like, and comment on today's episode that we are going to dive so hard into the last conventions of RNC and DNC, the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. Well, we have all witnessed the convention of both parties as they set their campaigns in motion. The Trump Party, also known as the GOP, I call it the Trump Party because he has taken it over, and the Democratic Party, led by Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz. In the final analysis of comparing the optics of both conventions, we will end up comparing night and day. Wow, night and day. Let's go with the comparison now. Let's take a closer look at how analysts at My Day, My Story podcast arrived at that night and day analogy. Unless we have a landslide election results, America has always elected our president on almost a 51-49 popular votes ratio. But listen, folks, this upcoming election is completely different. Can we take that in for a moment? This election is completely different in 2024. The Democrats have to up the ante. How about moving the stats to a 52-48 popular vote in favor of the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz ticket in the Electoral College vote calculus? We've watched this movie before. Decision 2024 is only a sequel. This upcoming election on November 5, 2024 is only a sequel of what we have witnessed in the past. How did DJT, now I'm trying to just not say Trump, how did DJT, who had millions of votes under Hillary Clinton, defeat her? The one who garnered 7 million popular votes over DJT. The answer to that was that he won the Electoral College votes with someone's help that we won't bother to mention in this podcast. And you know who that person is. And because Baba Kokobiowu meandered his way into the Oval Office in 2016 shouldn't mean that he can repeat the same stunt in 2024. 8 years later, we have learned some lessons. America and its well-established democratic institutions said no in 2020 and should say mba aunigba in 2024. And how will that be possible? That's simple. Let's vote en masse in support of the Harris-Walz ticket. Ondoi datuyaya, that diboko, our Democrats. All right, I'll have to translate that later on in this podcast. Before we forget, let the record show that DJT, that name that I'm not going to repeat, moved out of the White House unceremoniously and instructed his moving company to pick up moving boxes filled with national classified documents that will deter anti-American nations to stay out of American democracy. Good news, y'all. Trust the Americans to smell a wannabe dictator when they see one in an election. The Justice Department fished out the trail of DJT's poo-poo-infested move out of the White House. Afẹ́fẹ́ ti fẹ́ àti rí fùrọ̀ adìẹ. Did I say adìẹ? Well, afẹ́fẹ́ ti fẹ́ àti rí fùrọ̀ adìẹ in proper Yoruba parlance. The raid at Mar-a-Lago was so efficient that boxes and boxes of pilfered classified documents were retrieved again, and American democracy survived. DJT was brought under indictment for attempting to steal the nation's classified documents. Here's where we're going to with all these facts. Here's where we're going to with all these facts. Both major political parties have presented their flag bearers. DJT, you know who that is, and DTV, that's his mini-me, you know, the wannabe VP for his party. And then Vice President Kamala Harris and Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota have been the nominee for the Democratic Party. I have held my breath as both parties held their conventions. But now we have to go to what the highlights of both parties' conventions have been. Let's take the Republican Party's convention first. Hulk Hogan, and I used to love this guy when he was in his prime at the Boston Gardens and all over the arenas in New England when I was year high. Hulk Hogan had a display of brute violence, tearing his outfit in a reminiscent and shameful display of brutal, violent aggression. A faint remembrance of what transpired on January 6, 2021. And I hope that you haven't forgotten that, when DJT called for and got an insurrection. A brutal and fatal attack on the Capitol, the global exemplary place of democracy. Now, let's compare that to the just concluded Democratic National Convention, where the takeaways were, let's start counting. 1, joyful speeches by all speakers who took on to the center stage, including the Obamas. The Obamas, you remember them, right? Former First Lady Michelle and former President Barack Obama, both of who knocked it out of the ballpark. They knocked it right out of the ballpark. They reminded America, you and I, that we are watching a sequel of this American story called Democracy in Progress. That is the election. The Obamas, in essence, said, we have our work cut out for us. If I have to decode that statement and summarize the power couple's speech, along with what other Trump's former allies said, Onesun Domango, that is in Ondo dialect. In other words, Governor Tim Walz, the vice president who spoke on one of the nights, said, we'll rest when we die. Ìyẹn ni pé ọjọ́ ikú lọ́jọ́ ìsinmi. Òyìnbó sọ Yorùbá, bóyá àwọn yóò yí òkè báyìí ní ayéjọ́ ẹ̀wọ̀n ẹ̀. Ọlọ́run máa ṣe o. The good book also instructs us to sleep, but not to slumber. Bottom line is this: get out there and vote. Get Kamala in the White House. Get Tim Walz in the White House as president and vice president. Thanks for taking in this episode of My Day, My Story podcast. On behalf of my executive producer, Brian Lasser, and myself, and the crew at My Day, My Story podcast, I say, watch out for the next episode, and you are going to be surprised. I'm MC par excellence. Thanks for watching. Here's another video to watch. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel.